I said, screw it. I'll start my own company. In hindsight, this is crazy. So I moved to LA. I had $3,000 to my name. I've come to the conclusion it's not that rocket science. It's not that complicated. And yet the ecosystem seems to want to make it seem like it is. I try not to overcomplicate. I try to sort of distill the whole startup thing down to what does it take to build a business? And what does it take to sort of discover who you're selling to and what you're selling?
The man with the plan.
He's there.
So we're in the entrepreneur sandbox in Honolulu, and we've got this big open co-working space, and we're all working together. Except for today, they said if everyone can just take all of your things and move to the kitchen because we have a big event going on. I was like, but wait, I got to talk to Tony. So
I almost
hi.
forgot. I almost forgot that you were in Hawaii. So yes.
Yeah, totally. So this is my mobile setup. You should see me. I have so I brought my mic, I wrapped it in like a bunch of hoodies, and I brought it with me, and I had Walmart DoorDash me a tripod so I could talk to
Nice.
you like this. And then my computer it's my iPhone 16 Pro Max, and then my computer was way too low, so I found a box of pencils and set it up. And now here's my booth.
This is what I love about the new economy. It's like, we don't need no stinking offices. We're like the nomads of today. Like just anywhere you are, you like, boom, I'm there.
Totally. Exactly. Well, this is amazing. And I appreciate you taking the time, and I think it's such an interesting moment for you and I to connect and talk also just in the journey that we've had together. Also as my neurodivergent brother, going from I remember the first time I reached out to you as a business founder coach and said, I've got a thing, I've got an idea, and I think it could be something. And you said, so this is your idea and you think it's going to be something interesting. And we met, and I think on the first call, like, I don't know, I got such good juju and vibes and all the things from you. We spent quite a while exploring the extremely early parts of entrepreneurship. So I'm excited to dig into your position on those sort of stages of the startup life today.
So the thing that has been interesting for me is my journey began with a startup that I did many, many years ago. And what sort of surprised me was when I first did a startup here in Silicon Valley. It was a company that we bootstrapped. We ended up bootstrapping that to like $80 million in revenues. But what was funny is the Silicon Valley culture was so, in my mind, sort of elitist, weird. We would go to like these founder networking events. And it was like when you're in college and you meet somebody, and the first question is, "What's your major?" So at the networking events in Silicon Valley, it was always, "Who's your venture capitalist?" And it was funny to
Right.
me because we would say, "We don't have a venture capitalist." And then that's when you get that sort of sideways look, and they'd kind of go, "You know what? I think I see a friend of mine over on the other side of the room."
Right. Yeah.
Basically people would sort of stop talking to us because there was a sense that, if it wasn't super complicated and you weren't having a venture capitalist and it wasn't venture scale, that what you were doing just wasn't worthwhile. And here I am now, 20 some years later, having been in the startup ecosystem for a long time and seen a lot of successes and failures and had a lot of successes and failures. And I've come to the conclusion it's not that rocket science. It's not that complicated, and yet the ecosystem seems to want to make it seem like it is. And so, I met you, one of the things you probably took away was I try not to talk in jargon. I try not to overcomplicate. I try to sort of distill the whole startup thing down to what does it take to build a business, and what does it take to sort of discover who you're selling to and what you're selling. And I think it really is not that complicated if you kind of can distill it down to why would somebody want what you're making. And so that's been my focus is make it so that you make something someone wants, and then just freaking make it easy for them to get it. I mean, because it is amazing to me how many times I see startups that the founder falls in love with an idea, but they almost never think about the experience from the customer side enough. And so that's sort of what got me here.
Yeah. Well, and your simplicity and being able to boil it down, I love because you do. I mean, every single person you meet, especially investors, all have a different idea about what it, I've seen fantastic pitches where somebody's like, but you didn't have EBITDA on your slides. And it's like, wait, but also but also just a minute ago, it was like, keep it really high level and it's a teaser. So why would I have like EBITDA and like, it's just all of these different sort of things. And it's such an interesting process of learning to be a chef and sort of like putting things that you feel good about in the soup and just ignoring things that you don't. But everybody says you gotta make it this way. Like this is the recipe and this is the only way to make it. And just like anything, even something as simple as chicken soup has so many different ways that you could approach that, and so many different sort of ingredients and flavors for something as simple as chicken soup. But I love how you sort of distill it down kind of to that place, which
what's funny when you say, there's only one way to do it. And to a certain extent, I agree and I completely disagree. So, this is one of the beauties of ADHD is I can have multiple positions at once and both can be right. In that the one way to do it is to understand what how the person that you're pitching to thinks. What is it that is important to them? And sometimes it's very simple to find out what those things are, and sometimes it's a little bit harder. But one of the biggest mistakes I see is that founders think that, to your point about the meal, I make bouillabaisse a certain way. I am going to make it the same way, and I'm going to serve it to everyone that way. That's not what startups are, at least not in the fundraising standpoint, and even not even in the sort of when you scale, because when you create a product, one of the things that people try to do is they make bouillabaisse and they say, I have a bouillabaisse restaurant, but they go then and say to everybody, here's my bouillabaisse, as opposed to going, this is a particular kind of bouillabaisse. Mine is very spicy. Mine is from the northern region. Mine is this. And then sort of figuring out, how do I message that to the people that are looking for that? And it's the same thing with investors. You can do one pitch, but then you have to find the people that pitch is right for, as opposed to just going, I'm going to do the same pitch no matter who I'm pitching to. So there is one way, and the one way is just speak to the person you're pitching to, not at.
Right. Going back, I want to go back sort of to your experience as a startup founder. And by the way, your LinkedIn, just the scroll and the scroll and the scroll, and just so much experience, especially not only as a founder, but then as a mentor and as a coach and as an investor and advisor. And it's amazing. I think if I go back in to thinking about the founder piece, like coming out of, you went to Harvard, you come out of Harvard, did you think about going into, or did you go into traditional corporate ladder job and then get into to entrepreneurship, or did you always have kind of this bug in your brain that was like, I want to make something or do something?
It's sort of a kind of a funny story, because I thought about like my origin story a lot. And I think that, first of all, I was very influenced by the fact that neither my mom nor my dad really ever had traditional jobs. In that, my father, when I was growing up, my father was a doctor and sort of did the private practice. And so I hadn't ever thought of him as being sort of an entrepreneur, but, he's the guy that had to sort of, find his patients and build his reputation and create a brand and sort of figure out his pricing and all.
One of those nodes that you and I have exactly the same history on, that we always go like, oh my gosh, how did this, that's amazing.
And it's funny because growing up, I never considered the environment that he was doing that in, because, the startup environment is very tough. But for my father, this is a guy who was becoming a doctor, an African-American immigrant doctor in the 1960s. And so, I only found out really later, or I came to appreciate later, that he was like the first Black whatever in a lot of places. Like he was the first Black, head of a department. He was the Black. And I never appreciated the fact that he always had to fight for whatever he got. And then later on, my mom sort of had quit working, had worked to help put him through medical school. And then when he sort of started doing things, she was sort of the traditional housewife. But then she got bored and she then started a company. So she started this small company making Christmas tree ornaments and all sorts of things. And it was really fun sort of watching her sort of try and build something from nothing. And the timing was really important because she started building this when I went to Harvard Business School. And so I got to sort of watch her do it. And again, timing is everything. I was in the first class at Harvard Business School that had said, we are going to start to create an entrepreneurial studies program.
Wow.
So I was literally the first class at HBS that had portable computers, not laptops. When I say portable, these things weighed 40 pounds and could barely fit under the seat in front of you.
That was my first computer. It was an 8086 luggable, and I swear it weighed like 60 pounds.
Yeah, yeah.
But you had the little screen that, like the keyboard that came out from the little green
Right,
screen,
right.
two 5 1/4 floppies.
I didn't know everybody called them luggables, but yeah, it was a thing where you pulled down the bottom and that was the keyboard,
Hmm.
and it was a little 6-inch monochrome screen, and mine didn't even have a hard drive, so I had the two floppy disks, like you would put in the Lotus 123 on the top and then the data disk in the bottom.
Please load disk 12.
Right. So I kind of just through a series of circumstances ended up kind of with entrepreneurship sort of thrown in my face, almost so to speak. And then sort of the capper was, after when I business school, graduation was approaching, everybody was doing their interviews. I went for the typical interviews and I just couldn't get fired up about any of these jobs. And apparently nobody got fired up about me. So I ended up getting out of business school with like no job offers. And sort of between sort of seeing what my mom was doing, having no job offers, going through this entrepreneurial program, I said, screw it, I'll start my own company. In hindsight, this is crazy. I didn't know anybody in LA, but I liked the weather in LA. And I thought after living in Boston for 8 years and having snow and wind chill factor, screw it. I was going to at least suffer in the warmth. So I moved to
Nice.
LA. I had $3,000 to my name because my father didn't believe in like giving me any benefits. I moved to LA and I found an apartment that was $750 a month that wanted first month, last month, and security, which came to $2,250 and left me exactly enough money for the next month's rent. And so I was like, I'm starting a company, but I literally have zero cash.
Hmm.
But it was, in hindsight, I don't know that I would change anything because it forced me to be a hustler. I mean, in the true sense of the word. And it gave me an appreciation for what it really took to build from scratch. That first business kicked my ass in more ways than one.
What was the first business like? What was the name?
So the name of the first business was Hidden Heritage. And what actually it came out of my mom's sort of efforts to sort of create her own company because her company, again, she was making, she wanted to make ethnic Christmas tree ornaments. Like she thought it was bad that there was no representation for Black or Latino or anybody else. So she made like little Black Christmas tree angels and Black Santas and carolers and all these sort of Christmas decorations for your tree and for the house that were little African American characters because
Nice.
there there was almost no representation of that sort of thing in retail stores.
Hmm.
And because of that, she was actually making some headway. But whenever she got publicity, what was interesting is she always got invited to be as part of a panel. Like she was never getting PR on her own. And it was always a bunch of founders who were trying to create things for African American like representation, but who couldn't get retail placement. And so it was a wide swath of people. So when I came out, I was like, I'm going to create the marketplace. So I'm going to find the customers, take all the crap, put it in one place, and that way I'm going to match the things and screw retail. So
Right.
that's why Hidden Heritage was born. So it was born initially to sort of support my mom, but all these other people that it turns out she was meeting on the PR circuit.
What was the? I want to know about like whether it was the day before or the week before, or like what was? Do you remember one little light bulb or moment or feeling on hairs on the back of your neck or whatever where you were like, I'm doing this, like where it was noodling for a little bit and then you were like, okay, this is what we're doing, that sort of jumping off the.
It was literally I watched a videotape of one of her interviews, and they just went down the line of the sort of the makers, the creators, the producers of all these different products. And it was educational books, it was games, it was toys, it was decorations, it was historical references, it was all sorts of things that literally would be of interest to this particular audience, but which weren't getting retail placement at all.
Hmm.
And it felt to me like one of those sort of obvious kind of moments. And so I said, you know what, as far as I can tell, nobody else is trying to do this. It feels very much like this is something that's necessary. So I decided to do it. The only barrier was the fact that I had no money and no experience building a company. And HBS was not very useful because it teaches you how to take an existing job. It does not really, back then at least, it didn't teach you to go and start something. And the world was very different. There were no accelerators. There were very few angels, And in the entire country, there were only 400 VC firms, whereas now there's about 40.
Wow.
So it was it, but partially because of the ADHD, and you know this. There's sort of this ADHD thing where people sort of underestimate you, and there's for some of us there's this I'm going to do it because you think I can't kind of attitude, and that
With
was
a
literally
with a little bit of naivete about also like, yeah, I can do this. You just start sort of doing it and exploring with a lot less of the like, let me sit down and methodically think through sort of all the things,
yeah, and
which
the worst
can be a
part is
superpower.
and the worst part is my ADHD wasn't even diagnosed back then because my ADHD didn't get diagnosed till I was 40 or almost 50. And so back then there was always this cloud distractibility, lack of focus sometimes that I couldn't explain that did make it really much harder to sort of start that business. On the other hand, there was this other ADHD sort of I'll say recklessness, lack of planning, sometimes fearlessness that made me do things in a way that I think some people would have been like halted to do like I said okay I need models to model like because I some of this was jewelry and clothing and I wanted to have like pictures of kids playing with the toys and all. So I like not I need models. I have no money but I need models, and if I have models that means I'm going to need like professional photographers because I don't know how to bring pictures that look good. So like I need a photographer. I have no money, and so I just thought okay what do I do. So like I called a modeling school and I said, hi, I'm trying to start this business and I need a bunch of models. And you've got models who don't really have a portfolio. I'll make you a trade. I'll let you, they work for me for free, but I'll give them complete total rights of whatever comes out of the portfolio. And they can sort of have that as part of what they graduate. She's like,
Nice.
great, this is fabulous. I'll give you a bunch of models. So I like, okay, great. And I went and said, I need a photographer. Oh, same trick, but sort of different. So I called up some photographers that I could not afford. And I said, do you have an apprentice who's
Yeah.
trying to make it a business? And one of them said, yes, I do. And so he said, let me introduce you. And I said, how'd you like to like get this great portfolio of all these beautiful models that you don't have to pay for? That's free. And he said, okay, great. And so I like built this business with no money only because I had no money and I didn't know you shouldn't do these things. Like, and so that was how the whole thing got started.
Oh my gosh, that's great. I love that. I don't have money, but they can have photos. And then it's like, I don't have money, but I have models.
Right. It's like you take the thing you have and you show up and you go, I've got models. And or you go to the school and you go, I think I told the models I had a photographer before I did, but then I did have models by the time I went to the photographer. But then I went to the company that was going to sort of print everything. And I was like, I've got models, I've got a photographer, I've got a law firm. And they're like, okay, we'll take you on. Everything was on credit, everything was on the promise, and it was just a lot of hustle, which is interesting because I was not aware of all this new sophisticated. You have to do this, and you have to have traction. Like I just was doing the things that you need to do, which is what informs my methodology today. Which is there really is just here's the next milestone. Get to the next. My milestone is get models, get a
Yeah.
photographer, get this, and
Right.
focus on how to get that without overcomplicating it, and that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, without taking too much early on of I think you can completely overthink the first couple of stages of you've got to have deck's got to be exactly like this. You got to use the acronyms. You got to like, this is what traction means and by just kind of going headlong into it, you find yourself a month or a year later going like, "Oh my gosh, like I've made so much progress." And then you start telling the story in the way that it needs to be told. But I love that. That's a great story. How long did
The bad news is, you can do it in a way that I did it, which is you'd fall into a lot of holes. You trip
Mhm.
over a lot of things and fall into a lot of manholes. And I think that the environment almost makes it easier to do that or avoid it depending on your attitude. Like, there are so many things you can just go and build. Boom, 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 and spend your time and energy and everything else. But at the same time, there's so much more information available now in terms of how to, mistakes to avoid and how to do that. But a lot of the information that's out there, the problem is it's a lot of signal and noise. Some of it is great, some of it is really crappy. And I
Mhm.
think that makes it really hard because if it's easy to build something and it's easy to start and it's easy to make mistakes, depending on that's why I think some accelerators are really great. Because if
Mhm.
an accelerator can just say, here's the 6 things you should not do that like 90% of people do.
Right.
That'll be worth the value of an accelerator.
Yeah, it's almost like it's the narrowing and the focusing into the one hallway for a small amount of time on the messaging and the focus and the initial flywheel that starts to get you that baby bit of traction that you can then go do a bunch of times over. But how long did that business go?
So that went for 3 years, and I ended up selling it, but that was not like a life-changing exit. But well, it wasn't a financially life-changing exit, but it was definitely a life-changing exit from the standpoint of, holy crap, okay, so maybe I don't have to like go take a job I hate, but I really have to figure out how to do this better. Like it was sort
Right.
of it was sort of like when I ran my first marathon. At the end of that, I was like, I think I'll do that again, but I'm going to know how to, I'm going to need to know how to do it better so I don't hurt myself. I don't this. And it's the same kind of mentality. I want to do that again. And I want to figure out how to do that well, because it feels like a technique you can learn that you can sort
Hmm.
of apply over and over. And so, yeah, that got me really interested. And it's funny because after that, I spent a little time with an organization in LA called the Entrepreneur Education Center, where I was sort of helping teach, interestingly enough, teach what I'd learned to laid off aerospace workers. We had a
Wow.
contract with the city of LA because at the time aerospace was doing a lot of layoffs, and they're like, well, we have these literal rocket scientists who we don't need anymore. Like maybe they can create companies. And so I did that for a while. And then, then sort of went back and forth between going into like large corporations where they had entrepreneurial kind of opportunities to build something from scratch, and then creating other companies and then teaching it. So that's been sort of my flywheel for the last 30 years.
Nice. What was the what after that company and you sold it, and what would you move on to?
So the interesting timing, when I left that company, or that company opportunity sort of came to an end, I ended up getting recruited into a new division of Disney. And this is going to make me feel really old, but it was sort of the Disney home entertainment division that was trying to figure out how do we create sort of technology and plan, how do we use technology and planning around doing direct to retail distribution of our videotapes, our sort of Disney library of videos. And so it was an opportunity to go, how do you sort of build something from nothing, but do it under the umbrella of somebody else's financial, aegis, and
Totally. Somebody else paying for it.
my God, like, you can do no wrong because it's not like I'm not going to run out of money.
Right.
And I learned a lot about sort of how do you sort of create an organization, and how do you sort of create something, that doesn't exist, and, figure out how to use it and what the use cases are and sort of what to ignore, and all of that. And then, I was at Disney for 5 years. And then again, timing, the world is very funny and kind to me sometimes on timing. At the end, like I had just gotten to the point at Disney where I would have failed the hit by a bus test. And the hit by a bus test means I kept thinking, if I got hit by a bus, would Disney miss a beat? And the reality is, I had sort of built a department. I had some very strong sort of team leadership underneath me. And I realized that if I got hit by a bus, they would not miss me. And I was at a business school reunion that happened that year. And a good friend of mine said, I've got this startup I'm doing. I need an operations guy. Are you interested? You'd have to move to the Bay Area where the cost of living is twice as high, and I can only pay you half as much, but you'd be a founder. And I was like, okay.
Sign me up. Yeah, exactly. That sounds like the best deal, right? That's awesome.
So that was then what led me to a company called Optionetics, that was the one that we sort of scaled to 80 million. And it was funny because part of my motivation, honestly, to take the job was I get to move to the Bay Area, which was at the sort of just beginning to froth with interest in startups. And so even if this thing doesn't grow the way he thinks it's going to grow, I'm going to be like in the heart of like Startup Valley. So
Yeah.
it's great. And it turns out that 90% of the companies I networked with and met, they all died on the vine. So it wasn't the network that I thought it was going to be. Like there was Excited Home and Pets.com and like all these companies that were high flyers at the time. We're the one that sort of succeeded. And I made a lot of investor network friends and accelerator network friends and a bunch of things. And, the rest has been history.
Wow. Which is amazing because your first one really set you up to sort of to see and sort of have that process, which then led you to running into somebody and you're like, well, I've kind of done this before. And so that's amazing. How long did you do that one?
Wow. 15 years. Yeah, so yeah, we and which is really interesting because there is a moment where you go, at what point is a startup not a startup? And again, sort of it was interesting because again I had the hit by a bus test, but this was a little bit different because I was the COO, I was the sort of co-founder, I was the number two guy in the company, and so it took a lot more for like if I got hit by a bus, what would happen? But it still felt like most of my direct reports when I left, most of my direct reports had worked for me for 8 years, and so it was not there was a lot of shorthand. Like I could just say, got an idea, you do this. And it's like everybody knew the playbook.
Right.
And so now the thing that was interesting is, people think, oh, I get to the point where I get a company, I get it up to a certain amount, I could sell it. Ooh, now I get like an exit and a bank account and life is different. But it wasn't different in a like a glorious, happy, super, wow, this is great. Because like if I'm being honest, most of the money that I got from that, I haven't touched. Like I put it in a bank account and a brokerage account, and I don't touch it. I don't live on it. I don't do anything with it. My big thing is I'm not ready to retire. Like, and I was looking for something else to get involved in. And what actually made me sort of end up where I ended up is I got recruited by a bunch of accelerators to sort of mentor and advise. And I was like, you know what, that's volunteer work, but like I'll do it while I'm thinking about my next company. Before I knew it, I had been like working for free for accelerators for 6 years and loving it.
Oh yeah.
And had never come up with an idea that I loved. And I came up with a few ideas that I started to pursue, and I said, I don't like that idea. I don't like that idea, or I don't like that customer, or I don't like the outcome I'm producing. Like I wasn't in love. And my best friend from high school, he and I were talking every day because of something he was going through, and he said, I don't get it. Every time I talk to you, you're like, I don't have a great idea I'm in love with. But then you talk about these companies that you're advising and you like light up and you're like super excited. He said, so why don't you just do that as your business? And I was like, I can't do that. Like, he said, why not? I said, it's like charging money for sex. Like, I love that. And he said, that doesn't matter. Like, do they get value out of what you're doing? And I said, I think so. That's why I'm doing it. He said, then that should be your business. And you should stop all this bullshit about looking for something else to do.
Entrepreneurial prostitute.
Exactly. The next day, I had a meeting with one of the founders I was working with, and I said, you know what? A friend of mine convinced me I should stop just doing this for free. So I'm going to start charging for this, and I'm going to become a coach, advisor. I don't know what you want to call it, but I'm
Yeah.
going to be. And she just looked at me and she said, "So what are you going to charge?" And so I pulled a number out of my ass, and she said, "Okay, fine." And I was like, "Holy shit!" And and everybody that I was working with basically said, "Yeah, we'll keep going because this works." And what's surprising to me is even now, as a coach, most of my coaching clients have been with me for years. Like, there's a point where you go, "Okay, do they still need me?" But apparently, I'm so involved in their business and so such have sort of established a place as like a key brainstorming partner for them, and someone to sort of be objective, and they know that they trust me to sort of have their interest at heart.
Hmm.
I'm sort of a personal board member, and I still feel a little bit guilty because I wake up every day feeling like I get to have the best conversations with the best people, and somehow they pay me for that. And like I don't know, it's wild. So now I'm trying to figure out. I'm working on a thing now. I've mentioned to you offline, but I'm working on a thing now where I go. But that feels too limited because what I charge for that is not available for the people who I think need the most help, which are the pre-revenue. Like we're just getting started. How do we start creating some momentum? And so I'm working on sort of creating something again, a little bit off the normal traditional playbook, but which is just designed to help people go from 0 to 10. Um, Figure out all the things that pained me when I started my first company.
And I'll for anyone that's listening, this venture that Tony's getting into and starting and kicking off, we had I don't know, we were probably 5 months, right, since we had sort of had one of our coffee neurodivergent coffee chats about 50 different things that all get us excited in every direction. And then by the end of it, we're like, we're both going to be zookeepers or whatever. But we were talking about it, and I started telling you where I was at with the business and things like that, and your ability you listened, which I appreciate, and then within about 5 to 8 minutes, we're like, all right, I'm gonna put my thumb right on the problem. I'm gonna tell you what it is, and it's gonna hurt a little bit, I'm telling you, this is going to do it. And you did. And I'm telling you, it's one of those things that, like, I don't know what you call it, but when you're so close to something, I mean, it happens to developers and designers and other people where you're so close to something for so long that that's primarily the picture that you see. And someone comes up and taps you and says, hey, do me a favor, stand up, walk around the house, come back, look at it with different eyes. And in that 5 to 8 minutes, you did that. And I left going, oh my gosh, like that. I pretty much, and I had a call with Martina afterwards, my co-founder, and I was like, we're scrapping everything that we believe in and that we thought about, and we took the entire company back down. And when I mean basics, I mean it's like me and her and Google Workspace and Slack. Like we took like everything down back to bare bones with this sort of fresh view, and it's completely different. It's a completely different. We have started Stacklist 2.0. So I will tell you, not to set the bar too high, but Tony can do it in 5 minutes. He will completely solve your company forever. No, but that's the experience I had, literally just from a coffee chat that you and I had. So I appreciate you.
Well, because we are sort of ADHD brothers from another mother, you'll appreciate the fact that quite literally, I don't like I do take ADHD meds, but I never take them before I do sort of my coaching sessions, because sort of there is a positive side to ADHD, which is I can have somebody talk to me and context switch like a zillion times and talk to me at like 1.5 speed, and somehow it is like I'm like in the Matrix. I'm like the guy catching bullets or whatever.
Seeing things from all the different angles and then going, okay, I'll tell you the angle that you should look at this from.
Right. And it's funny. I don't do that. I don't think as effectively when I'm on meds. Like meds are when I have work to do, but when I'm sort of taking in a lot of sort of pieces and trying to make a Death Star out of the Lego, like you're throwing me the Lego pieces and I go, and there's a Lego Death Star. Like that's it. That I do when I'm not on meds. And it's funny because I had a call yesterday with a woman who was interested in this new program, and she sort of called and we were talking about all the stuff that she's doing. And it was weird because I felt horrible because she was telling me all this stuff, and I go like, that's a problem, that's a problem, that's a problem. And like, sort of in the course of the conversation said, I see this thing and I don't know why like you don't see it. And I thought she was like, you're an asshole. And like, but then like later that afternoon, I go on LinkedIn and she's like, I just had the most amazing session with Tony. And I was like, whoa, like because apparently the light bulb went off, like, okay, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. And it is a combination of empathy and I'll call it tough love. I'm sort of like Simon from, American Idol. Because of the experiences I went through as an early entrepreneur myself, I know that cheerleaders can only be so helpful. If I'm doing something wrong and you go, oh, that's great, at least you're trying, that's not super useful. If
Right.
I'm doing something wrong, the things I'm doing right, I don't need help with. It's the things that I'm missing or the things I'm not seeing or the things where I need to course correct. That's where I actually need to hear something. And sometimes that can be painful, but that's actually what's valuable. And so because I had the empathy of going, I would rather have had someone tell me that stuff when I was starting and struggling. That's what I focus on. And it sort of makes it a little bit different in terms of interacting with me because, as you know, people that interact with me have to be able to go, I'm going to let my ego off to the side for a second and hear what he has to say. I'm not saying everything I say is right or you have to listen, but I want you to hear what I'm saying and at least process it. Because it is this outside perspective. And sometimes that outside perspective mimics an investor's outside perspective or some part of your market of prospects outside perspective. Because part of what you need to understand as a founder is everybody doesn't know what you know. Everybody doesn't trust you the way you do. Everybody isn't as optimistic that you're going to deliver what you're going to deliver. So you need to hear the skepticism that comes from people on the outside when they hear what you say.
Right. I will also say from the founder side of things, there's a journey that I feel like I had to almost go through as well. And when I look back, I notice similarities to, my dad was one of those that would always be like, 5 kids and I'll tell you all about money, but nobody's going to listen the first time. You got to learn it yourself, whatever it is. And it's sort of like, I kind of did, like, I kind of do, like, I kind of have to go through some things and have some of those moments. And I think there's interesting when you first start out, you want all the advice you can get. And there's a good chance that you're probably going to think, okay, I talked to these really smart people. I should start doing this stuff. And then you start realizing that you're sort of swinging the bat of the pinata all over the place. And so now you start to get a little bit of also pessimism and negativity and some of those sort of things from the outside. So then you start to steel yourself, because you really have to, like, if you're going to build something big, bold, great, different, whatever, you've got to have a level of crazy that is like, no, I'm telling you, this is how the world can look. And people go, that's dumb. The world's not going to look like that. And you're like, no, you're dumb. Like, it is going to look like that. But to get to that place, you also have to go through a period where you put up Teflon and you're just sort of like, but then you've got to start to learn how to let the right pieces through. And so then you go through evaluation. And so I think what's interesting also is that when you and I first met and started working through those, there's things that I also had to go through in the periods of being away from each other for a little bit to then come back and hear it once I've got the right good amount of Teflon, but I also know and hear the things that come through in the right way. And I'm not taking every piece of advice. To hear it at that moment was also the thing that was like the right moment for that light bulb to go like, ding. And I literally went like, worldview changed. Okay, where am I going to point now, and just go in that direction. So I appreciate whether it's synchronicity, the universe, Tonyverse, whatever, it was the right time. And so I appreciate that. Like, you had a dramatic impact in that 5 to 8 minutes of us pivoting and focusing in a different direction. So.
Right. And you know what? That is the thing that sort of energizes me every day, is when I hear feedback that somebody says, that thing you said to me. I had a guy that I got on the phone with who's joining this new program, who said the reason I got really excited when I saw the program is we had one conversation like a year ago. He goes, and I left that conversation like everything changed, and I just the way I looked at things, the way I considered things changed completely. He says, and if I could have afforded sort of one-on-one coaching back then, I would have done it. But he said, so much of what was in that call I've used, and when I see it, sort of playing out, it makes sense. So it's funny when you talk about sort of the process of being a founder, it is way more iterative, I think, than people think it is. I think they think it's, I'm going to come up with an idea and then I'm going to build that idea and it's going to be great. But it really is more micro steps. It really is, I have the beginning of an idea that I think will work. And then you have to sort of say, let me figure out whether or not, what parts of that are in my head. What are the assumptions in my head that are true and which are the ones that are not? And then there's sort of how do I, validate my assumptions? How do I sort of figure out which parts to change? Whatever you start out with is almost never what people end up with. And we often overuse the word pivot, but there's like these little micro pivots where you go, instead of doing it this way, I'm going to do it that way. That's not a pivot, but that is an evolution of the idea based on
Right.
reality. And so there's this 100% ego, like built here, this is mine. And then it goes from that to like 80% that and 20% like, this is what the market's telling me. And then it's like 30% what the market's telling me. And you find a place where there are still enough of what you wanted to do and who you wanted to do it for that it feels like yours, but it feels like yours that has been adapted in a way that the people you're trying to sell it to or offer to say, this will have an impact on my life. And when you
Yeah.
find that place, that's when you can start to build momentum, because you found your customer, you found your outcome, you found your use case. And those are the things that are almost never right on day one.
Totally. And then you start being able to refine the story and tell it in so many different ways based on the audience and all that. And it just starts to flow in such a fun way that you just get so excited every time I want to tell a story. I was at a Pauhana last night, an after work, and we were at the surf break, which is where my co-founder Martina and I will have our dorms for 2 months here in Hawaii. And I was sitting next to someone, and she said, so tell me about Stackless. And I've got now a suite of things that I will try when sort of trying to distill down this big sort of grand vision into something that is very specific, that I try and make the light bulb come on at a grand scale with as few sentences as humanly possible. So I open my phone, and I type the word recipe, and my garlicky mushroom recipe came up in about 1 second. And I said, this is the best garlicky mushroom recipe. And if I just take this and send it to you, you can save it. And now you have it. And she was like, no, I need that recipe. She downloaded the app and then she was like, okay, airdrop it to me. And immediately it was that sort of like, which goes back to the initial vision, which is like, if I tell you about something and you're like, that sounds great, send it to me, that you're like, okay. You're going to have to wait till I get home, or let me see if I can find it, or, whatever. But to be able to sort of like immediately share and have someone else immediately be able to save it and recall it within, a short amount of time was fun. So it's nice to be able to sort of have gotten through all the different places to be, sort of where we're at now. Obviously, we've got a lot of refinement to still go, but it's at a good fun place.
It's funny because the thing that most people don't talk about, but is a big deal in the early days of startup, is how do you reduce friction? The some companies have more than others, and different kinds of friction. For your company, for example, with Stackless, it's the same kind of friction that exists around AI. It's like, I can tell there's some value there, but I don't know exactly how I would apply it in my own world just at this second without thinking about it. And anytime you make somebody have to think about something like for more than a nanosecond, that's friction. So it becomes how do you sort of not make them think, how is this valuable? So the example you just gave of, I'm not going to tell you, I'm just going to show you one value. Now, is that all Stackless can do? No. But because that's something that Stackless can do, that's one option for this is the value proposition we're going to give. But then we have to go, is there a business model around that? And is there a big enough market for it? No.
Totally. And the conversation I had just before talking to Kelly, who I just met, who's great, was with the owner of the building and the owner of the space that we were at. And all I turned around and said, I said, you see that QR code on the wall? What if the people who lived here scanned it and it was all the places you recommend within a 10-block radius? He was like, well, can we set it up tomorrow, or do you want to do the next day? And I was like, no, we can do tomorrow. That sounds good. But so different places, but also just trying to find, but it takes so many iterations and trial and error of that, like refinement of, so.
But you're doing the right thing, which is, you look for that. I don't, you didn't call it an aha moment, but you look for sort of that moment when you're telling them, when you can sort of see the light bulb go off. And so there is a skill that the best founders have, which is they'll tell the story over and over, but they will note where in the story the attitude seems to be excitement and where it's sort of boredom, and they'll sort of edit it the next time they tell it, and they'll sort of focus on those parts that were good. And at some point you tell it enough, you go, now every time I tell it, I only tell the parts that are the aha moments. And that's number one, I found my audience and I found my messaging. But you have to be able to go, I'm not married to the first version of the story I used to tell. And a lot of founders I run into think that I literally have had people say, when I talk to people, they don't get excited, so they just don't get it. And I go, okay, that's right.
My story is so concrete. I've worked on it in my mind so much that I've come up with such a good one from my perspective that I just need to find the right people who will get it versus trying it. Yeah. And I think that's, I think having that sort of experimental and testing, iterative, you're right. It's like sometimes every time you tell it, there's a different word placement. There's a different where you sort of drop the mic on the piece that is going to do, whatever, and all those little pieces until you really just sort of find it. And then you've got lots of tools in the tool belt to be able to tell the story.
But you have to be open to the idea that maybe my idea isn't necessarily a bad idea. Maybe my idea wasn't the best idea. Sort of like, because like Viagra started off as like heart medication. So it's like, if somebody had said, I'm going to continue to make this heart medication, it would have missed a huge opportunity in saying, right, this is what happens when you actually use that thing.
Right.
And let me adapt what I'm doing. And so there is an open-mindedness that, and this is where it gets strange. You need a fairly robust, healthy ego to be a founder in the first place, but you also need to be able to go, I'm not 100% right, but I'm also not necessarily wrong. And I have to find where that intersection is by listening to people. And there's a way to do it because, even in the framework that I use, a lot of people say, oh, I get it. I need to go out and talk to people. But then they go out and they talk to people the wrong way. Like they go, if I built this, would you buy it? And people go, that's not helpful. Like there's a way to figure out what they need or what they want or what would have an impact on them. If you just say, would you buy this? You'll have a bunch of people that are going to be polite and go, yeah, you look like a nice guy. Sure, I'd buy it.
Right. Totally. Well, and it's like once you get it gets much easier, but it's very hard to start talking to people. And I think the best interviews are the ones where you absolutely don't even get adjacent or within the ecosystem of what it is that you're building. You're literally just asking questions of like, tell me about your day job, or tell me about the thing that you're focused on and what's like crazy frustrating about it. And there's never been any mention, and then you start to sort of like you dance around it without even mentioning any of the buzzwords or any of the things, and start to that's when I think you do get like the most natural feedback, and then you take those and and synthesize those in it's the most objective content output that you're going to get.
And there are some questions that nobody asks that are absolutely vital. Like one of the best questions I find is, why haven't you switched from doing it the way you're doing it already? Like, why haven't you
Mm-hmm.
made it change before? Because one of the things that gets underappreciated is what I call sort of the switch index, meaning whatever I was doing when you approached me as a founder to buy your thing, take your thing, I had a set of behaviors that I was already doing. That's my before. And so you're asking me to change my behaviors. And change is one of those things that requires some motivation and some value. Like I'm not going to change unless there's a benefit in
You're
changing. I
asking
don't
me to use Android tomorrow.
right. And
No,
I'm
I'm
not going
good.
to change.
I'm
I'm not
good.
going to change just because you asked me to. I'm going to change because there's something in it for me.
Right.
And founders don't spend enough time understanding the inertia behind the before, because I need to understand what is it that is keeping you held there. What is the adoption friction, I call it, or the inertia that says, what do I have to overcome to get you to switch to do something differently or to use my thing? Because even if I'm giving you another browser, like you have a browser and I'm giving you another browser, you're going, it's a browser. Like you don't have to actually do anything different. My browser looks the same. All the menu items are in the same place. There's no changes. There is, because I have a habit of just automatically, my go-to is I go to the old browser. So why should I
Yeah.
change my habit because you say I should? So there always needs to be a sort of a calculation of what would make it worth my making any effort at all to make a change in my life, even if it's a small one, to adopt this thing. And so you have to figure out what's the value I offer versus your before. And that's something that I spend a lot of time in the framework helping founders kind of really narrow in on. Like what's the my incentive to buy or my incentive to move.
Unless you're Kyle or Tony, and then it's like, hey, I have a new browser. And it's like, ooh, let me see. Let me check that out. I want to see
Well,
what that is. Let me try.
yeah,
Let me try this.
you have to understand, Tony spelled backwards is why not. So I'll try.
So
I'll try anything.
the reason I probably get so much spam is because I've probably signed up for and tried every product that has ever come. You know what I mean? Because I just want to know how it works. But I guess I am the ICP, the lowest hanging fruit ICP. Somebody said there's a way to do a thing. If you had to as we wrap up, if you had to give one piece of good advice that you think back to the first entrepreneurial leap that you took, for people who are either thinking about getting into it or in the first week, the first month, what's one thing that you would impart, either to focus on or to think about, or maybe a position to consider?
It's interesting. You say when I think back to the first company I had, but context has changed a little bit because
Mm,
with AI and with sort of vibe coding and with all the sort of no code, low code, all the stuff. But one of the differences is it is so easy to sort of go out and build stuff. So I if I had to give one piece of advice, I would say it is sort of a two-part. One is always think of your first idea as a draft. Like this is not my final, this is not the thing I'm submitting. And as a draft, you would expect that if I show this to people, they're going to tear it to pieces and say, this is shit, you need to fix this, and red pens and everything. And you need to sort of go out with your ego willing to say, I am looking for critical feedback, not like cheerleaders. I'm looking for critical
hmm
feedback because the more I understand the holes in my own thinking, the more I'm able to sort of strategically plan around those. So that's part one. And then the second thing is, just like the idea as a draft, I would go, once you sort of set it in motion, think of your go to market, the first part of your go to market, as I am testing something. This is an experiment. I have an outcome in mind. It is supposed to work. When I add these two chemicals together, they turn purple and yet. Um, and so your go to market isn't something that ever should be able to disappoint you. Like, oh my God, I did all this stuff and I heard crickets. No, when I went out and did it, I had this theory that this is going to be the response. And when it is not the response, my job is to act like a scientist and go, what was wrong with my original thinking? What was the thing here that broke that I should adjust for so that I have the next version of my experiment? Like in the MCU, there's this whole scene in one of the Iron Man movies where he's like doing these tests and it keeps going, sequence failed, sequence failed. That's kind of how you have to approach this. Is
Right.
you have to then, so after you have the draft sort of finalized, you then go out and say, I created a final version of a test plan. Now I'm going to go out and test it, and the test is going to fail. But the test failures are actually super valuable if I think of them that way. Instead of I think of them as like I fucked up and I have no value.
Totally.
It always has to be, what did I learn? And then you go, let me make a tweak based on what I think I've learned. And sometimes it's talk to people. Sometimes it's look at the metrics. But you just have to look at this as a expect it to fail, but I expect that failure to inform the version that comes after.
Yeah.
That would be it.
I love that. It makes me think of something that I heard once where it was basically like you don't have a company, you have a startup, which is a thing that may turn into a company.
Yeah.
And the startup is essentially 100,000 experiments to then see if it will graduate into a company. And so I love that idea of just chewing through as many experiments as you can. And then I'm not to say that I'm there yet, but like you get better and better. And then all of a sudden, by doing so many experiments, you've turned into the expert of this one, space or this one thing, this one problem.
And the caveat is, when I say it's an experiment, you really have to have some clarity on what is the result or the results plural of the experiment that indicate that are really good at helping me diagnose what went wrong. Because too many times people end up with sort of these superficial, metrics, that the vanity metrics, or that don't tell you this is where it broke down. And sometimes it can be as granular as I put the message out and X number of people responded to it. And so, is the website crappy? Well, if not enough people are getting to the website, then it was not the website that was crappy. It was the thing that got them to the website. And so it's like you have to sort of have an expectation of what should the metrics be along the way, not just the end to end, but sort of for each component. And when I see what they should be and I see what's not working, what is the adjustment that I need to make? What am I not thinking about?
Right.
And again, that's where you sometimes have to go, I know my favorite colors are red and gold, and I know that I want to use these kinds of words, but I heard a bunch of other words when I was talking to people, and maybe I should use their words. I went to I heard some color person saying that when you're doing design, these colors create these emotions, these colors create these other emotions. And today, that is so fucking easy because you can, have your discovery conversation, get the transcripts from all of them, throw all those transcripts into AI, and then say, tell me what people are finding as the value that they're looking for, the frustration they're having. Like it'll synthesize all of that for you so that you can have 12 conversations and it'll find things that you don't catch because you don't want to hear them. Like you're not listening for those because your bias says, I'm listening for this thing that supports what I'm doing. Whereas the AI doesn't have an opinion. They don't have a horse in the race. So it'll just go, here's what people say, and here's what people like, and here's what people are looking for, and here's why people have it switched. And that sometimes will help you go, I'm going to take my ego out of the equation and try to make the adjustments based on what objectively is coming back, and then test that.
Yeah. Amazing. Cool. Well, thank you so much. I'm getting kicked out of the booth. So this is great timing for all the things. I appreciate you.
Okay.
You're the best. And thanks for taking the time today.
And if this gets published, send me the link so I can go share it and tell people I got to talk to the great Kyle Hudson before he became super famous.
Yeah. I appreciate it. Amazing.
All right, my friend.
Have a great day.
Thanks. Bye.